Cambridge Muslim College, training the next generation of Muslim thinkers.
Assalamu alaikum, dear colleagues and dear friends, dear students. It's my great pleasure to be here tonight, and it's a great honor to be invited by Sheikh Abdul Hakim Murad, and thank you so much for everyone who found time and possibility to come this evening. And I would like to thank also Mustafa Ece and Henrietta and Tariq for trying to help me with the technical equipment, which played some games. We hope it was the last time, and now it will be okay. Anyway, my presentation on feminine soundscapes from Muslim in Central Asia is certainly a study which I've been doing for many years as a musicologist and ethnomusicologist. So I would like to point out that I never had any degree in theology, and probably what you know much better than I do, you will see it's, I'm not the right person to ask. But my study of music and poetry in Central Asia was focused on the question how Islam, and particularly Sufism, have affected music development during the last centuries, poetry and female society, because it turned out that women managed to preserve more genres of Sufi songs and rituals than male society, at least within Central Asia. So the Muslims first entered Central Asia in the middle of the 7th century. I'm sure you all know that Central Asia, it was the southern part of former USSR with 5 republics, and it's on top of the China, Iran and Afghanistan. So the new way of life brought by the Muslims spread throughout the region. In the following centuries, native cultures were replaced or transformed as Islam molded the people into a single community, the Islamic Ummah. During the height of the Abbasid Caliphate in the 8th and the 9th century, Central Asia and Mavranahr experienced a blossom. Bukhara became one of the leading centers of learning, culture, and art in the Muslim world. Its magnificent, rivaling contemporaneous cultural centers such as Baghdad, Cairo, and Cordoba. Some of the greatest historians, scientists, and geographers in the history of Islamic culture were native of the region, and our understanding of Islam in Central Asia will not complete without considering the Islamic teaching called Sufism, where Bukhara was a central place to its development. The word Sufism, which is probably, according to the broadly spread explanation, derived from the Arabic suf or wool, therefore Sufi, a person wearing an ascetic woolen garment, denotes Islamic mysticism. Although outside movement have had some influence on Sufi terminology, Sufism is definitely rooted in Islam itself. Before describing specifics and difference of some major tariqah in Central Asia, let us examine the common principle and practice that unite them under the name of Sufism. The Sufi path, leading to God and the higher mysteries of the human self, is based on the doctrine of stations or maqamat and states, hal or ahwal, which retains its importance for the Muslim mysteries, and it's considered to be the cornerstone of Sufism. It may therefore serve as an apt introduction to the fundamental points. The way or the form of mystical perfection suggests at least 3 different stages: Sharia, Tariqah, and Haqiqah. Sharia means, as you know, to follow the public law. After learning Sharia, one can reach the Tariqah, the way, hence its second meaning as a Sufi order. This term Tariqah appeared in the 9th century, representing not only the image of the journey but also the image of the traveler and his stations, maqams, which are essential for Sufism. The foundation of mystical dimension of tasawwuf or Sufism requires an explanation. The Sufi path leading to God and the higher mysteries of human self is based on the doctrine of stations and state, which have lost their importance for the Muslim mysteries, and it's considered to be the cornerstone, as I said. As you might probably well know, the way suggested at least different stages. Let me see if I have here the... Yes, these are stages or maqams. So, and they are tabah, confession, wara, circumcision, zuhd, temperance, faqr, poverty, sabr, tolerance, tawakkul, hope, prospect of God. So those maqams or stations are stable, but there are other sudden outpourings of divine grace, which are which are instant states of the soul. They could be different, introducing various emotional feelings and sentiment. You can see here all those, statements, all the stations, states of the soul, and only achieving the last stage, the traveler becomes a Sufi. Sufis strive to constantly be aware of God's presence, stressing contemplation over action, spiritual development over legalism. Popular participation in Sufi gatherings and support for various types of tariqah remains high through the Muslim world, and enhancing communal activities such as zikr, also known as dhikr. Sufism depends on emotion and imagination and the divine human relationship, and Sufism is related to the Sunni-Shia split, schools of jurisprudence, social class, gender, geography, or family connections. It's closely associated with both popular religion and orthodox expression of Islamic teaching. It has been both opposed and supported by the state in different times and different places. So once again, these maqam stations, which I wanted to show you in order to explain that there is an inner development, of the stages, which comes from the first higher in tessitura and dynamics, and on the highest level, after achieving the culmination, it drops down. The reason I'm talking about those states, it's a phenomenon which is very closely associated with the music of the area. Sufi zikr particularly. But the main features of Sufism, it's community meetings, regular community meetings in certain place for religious purposes, a hierarchy within a constant number of members of congregation, which is supposed to have a leader, a sheikh, peer, or imam, and his subordinates, and to include 2 or 3 generations. And the presence of succession called silsila, chain, aimed at the transmission of sacred knowledge from older to younger members of the congregation. The performance of zikr, or remembrance of God, is an act of devotion during and after prayer, is the final, feature of Sufism. So Central Asia is the center of Sufism. I think it was somewhere, yes, here. Played an extremely important role in the development of Islamic thought and culture. One can mention that the author of Hadith Sahih, the true collection of sayings and actions of the Prophet Muhammad, the second most important book in Islam after the Holy Quran, is Imam Bukhari, who was born in Bukhara, the fourth holiest place in Islam after Mecca, Medina, and Jerusalem. The names of Tirmizi, Marginani, Al-Farabi, Avicenna, Al-Biruni, Ulugh, and others are well known, not just in the realm of the Islamic world. Alongside provision of its invaluable input into mainstream Islamic thought, philosophy, and science, Central Asia was the place where at least 4, or even if you count properly 5, out of 12 main orders of Sufism were founded. The names of Central Asian masters: Ahmad Yasavi, Yasavi order; Abdul Qadir Gilani, Qadiri order; Najmuddin Kubra, Kubraviya order; Naqshbandi, Bahauddin Naqshbandi, Naqshbandi order; and also number 5, Mavlana Rumi, who was born in Balkh, Mavlaviya Sufi order. And Balkh, as you know, it's in Afghanistan, so it's also Central Asia. So those names are among the holiest names of Sufism. It's interesting if we now, if you ask me about the examples, for example, from my recent interview in Tashkent, in the capital of Uzbekistan, I found that even at from interviewees, that even at the beginning of the 20th century, Sufi zikrs were widely carried out in Tashkent in 2 ways: Jahariya, loud or open, and Hufiya, in silence. Though Sufism is mostly associated with male activity, women in Tashkent performed hidden Sufi zikr in Hadra district until 1970s, according to an elderly informant, Munira Alimatova, born in 1950s. In 20s. Historically, in Sufism, as the best way to achieve spiritual ecstasy was used love poetry with symbolic meaning. The demand for such poetry from the 9th century stimulated the flow of lyrics aiming to create certain emotional states: tolerance and obedience, terrestrial love, hope, and so on. Majlis, as the main form of social gathering, included conversation, discussion, collective prayers, and listening to music. The favorite poetic form for such social gatherings was ghazal. So what is ghazal as poetic form? I'm sure many of you know very well. And why it has become so popular in Sufi practice and art. There are many definitions of ghazal, the first of which is dated by the beginning of the 20th centuries and belong to Shamsuddin Qais. Ghazal, he said, in initial meaning is affection towards women and also friendship with them. Encyclopedia of Islam defines ghazal as, I quote, a song, the elegy of love, frequently and also erotic elegiac genre, the song of man to the woman. End of quotation. At the same time, the history of this poetic genre, beginning from 9th century in Arabic poetry, formation and bloom on Persian soil, Attar, Sadi, Hafiz, marvelous fruiting in the Turkic medieval literature, Nasimi, Navoi, Fuzuli, Babur, testifies not only about the widest area of this propagation, but also the universal poetics of genre, which, in the process of this development, overgrew its boundaries of its origin. If we summarize theoretical studies of ghazal's poetic genre, its formal elements canonized from the time of Sadi and Hafiz, they are namely are writing ghazal by baits, 2 verses. Bait is, 2 verses meaning in Arabic a house. Second, rhythmic baits according to the formula AA, BA, CA, and so on. Third rule, the use of radif or monorhyme. And the last one, the use of tahallus, or reference to the name of the author, usually in the last bait. Here we are. Semantically, ghazal is purely lyric, plotless form, which characterizes, first of all, internal state, but not external action. Therefore, it is in the larger degree statement about a state rather than a process. Semantic of ghazal is characterized by the presence of two semantic poles, I of the lyric hero and you or he, she of his beloved, which are mutually impenetrable. Usually between these two poles there is a space of separation or break. This separation creates the poetic emotional stress of ghazal. Furthermore, there are a number of those relations in ghazal. I, rival, I, supporters, and so on. No wonder that the main bulk of Sufi poetry, including Sufi poetry of Central Asia, is written in the form of ghazal. Another factor which makes ghazal a universal form of Sufi art is that it was and is sung. For instance, all classic repertoire of traditional Uzbek and Tajik music is based on ghazal form. In the long history, the Sufi poetry, which was accepted as the best way to achieve spiritual ecstasy, was either recited or sung, and the 10th century Central Asian scholar Al-Farabi said, "The most perfect is a melody united with verse. This is what can move a man and change his morals." So, 10th century statement. From the beginning of the 10th century, the process of listening to poetry put on music called sama, which became a daily habit and social life of Sufi brotherhood. Female Sufi poetry. Maqams of Tariqa. I didn't show it to you, but it was exactly my aim was to show you this step-by-step ascendance to the highest level of culmination. Female Sufi poetry in Central Asia. Discussing of the question of the female role of Sufism would not be complete without citing the famous expert in Muslim culture, Professor Anne-Marie Schimmel. I had the honor to know her very closely and even to be her friend before she passed away. In her book, Mystical Dimensions of Islam, she notes that Sufism, I quote, more than stern orthodoxy, offered women a certain amount of possibilities to participate actively in religious and social life, and also that a number of Sufi orders had women attached to them as lay members. End of quotation. Moreover, that she names historically known women attached to Sufi orders. Among them are Shah Jahan's elder daughter, Jina Nara, who joined the Qadiriya or Sufi order and was highly praised by her master, Mullah Shah, and Bibi Jamal Hatun, died 1639, who was one of the outstanding saints of the Qadiriya order during its formative period in Punjab. As another scholar pointed out, one may assume that even in our day, women are usually more concerned with ritual prayer and fasting than the average man in a Turkish or Pakistani household. The end of quotation. Shamim Berni Abbas, the author of the book The Female Voice in Sufi Ritual, defines the main area of female participation in Sufism and its ritual on the basis of her research in the Indian subcontinent. The author marks 10 different forms of female Sufi activity, but we would like to point only on 3 of them. First, women as mystics in Sufi practices. women as creators of Sufi poetry, and women as singers, musicians, participants of Sufi songs. So, in Central Asia, there is a historical evidence of women participating in the development of Sufism. Investigation of many Asian cemeteries and tomb complexes in Central Asia shows women had a big influence in that respect. For example, in the Sverdlov district of Bukhara city, there is a grave of Mustura Hanım or Agai Buzurg. She was a famous murshid or pupil of the Naqshbandi order. She died on 30th July 1523. Agai Buzurg had received her status as a murshid from Sheikh Shati Gayati and his wife. She was brought up in the spirit of murshid by her grandfather and father. Among her disciples were both men and women. Another leading Sufi woman held in Kubravia was called Bibi Khadija, who lived near Khiva, it's Khwarezm area, the western part of Uzbekistan. She lived in Khiva in the 14th century. Her grave is situated in Agahi village in Khiva district. She dealt only with women, whom she recruited into her order as teenagers, and whom she educated by sharing her knowledge. In the surroundings of Bukhara, another female Sufi, Bibi Zumrat, was known. Nowadays, the local old women come to her tomb to pay tribute and say their nightly prayers. But women in Central Asia were also involved in creating the Sufi poetry. The names of the most famous female poets for the area are Zibunisa, Nadira, Uvaisi, and Anvar Oten. Due to the lack of time, I would like just to bring examples of two of these poets. Nadira Mohlaraim from Andijan, 1792-1842. Here we are, but certainly it's the artwork by contemporary Uzbek artist, and so it has kind of contemporary features. She had written poems under the pen names of Kamila and Mahnuna. She wrote in Persian and Uzbek languages. Her work, consisting of 10,000 bayats, is widely known these days in Central Asia. She used a wide range of genres such as muhammas, rubai, fard, but mostly ghazals. News on Nadira life and poetry began to spread in her lifetime. Historical treatises such as Muhtahabut Tavorikh of Hakim Hontura, Tahfatu Tavorikh of Avaz Muhammad Ator, and others contained valuable information about Nadira's life and activity. I would like to ask Henrietta to help me to read one of the ghazal of Nadira in my translation, please.
O straight cypress, what are your thoughts? Your promise of rendezvous burnt my soul. Bound, I pray for pardon. My aim is your perfection. You argue with the face of the moon. O sun, have you achieved eclipse? For assets, water of paradise or water of Kaaba. For me, the pure drops of your tears are enough. You may not yet read them. But your fortune-telling on holy sheets was blessed. More precious than Jamshid's cup. O Sufi beggar, your broken ceramics. Your lovers died in sorrow, but you have no particle of care. O sick heart, in separation you have not strength to beat. O Nadira, you speak about love, and your condition becomes famous amongst the masses.
Thank you very much. Berta Davidova, who is of Bukharian Jewish origin, is a very famous singer, was a very famous singer who I had the privilege to interview a couple of times. And she's left a very essential amount of recordings of maqam genres and classical ghazals. One of them we are going to hear now. It's the ghazal by Nadira, I've Lost My Way. It goes on and on and on, high and high, high in tessitura, and then suddenly drops at the end. So it's just a typical structure of these classical ghazals and their performance. Another very famous female poet of 18th, 19th century was Jahannatin Waisi from Margilon, which is also Fergana Valley. She had created 15,000 hemistiches. Her works, divans, collection of ghazal, are still popular among Uzbek people nowadays. One of her divans is kept in Tashkent at the Institute of Academy of Science of Republic of Uzbekistan. It includes ghazals, muhammas, musaddas, murabas, and poems Shahzoda Hassan. One of her popular ghazal is called If I Don't Ask, I Die. Please, Henriette.
If I ask for the symbol of the meeting from the people who love, they kill me. If I don't ask, I die. If I build a shop of love for the suffering people, they kill me. If I don't build, I die. Don't put me to torments of jealousy, O death, if my beloved is sitting with another. If I bark unceasing like a dog at his door, he kills me. If I don't bark, I die.
Thank you very much. So, this was the poem. There is another one, but now, due to the lack of time, we would rather move to maqam and shash maqam. Shash maqam is the Uzbek Tajik classical music, a monumental cycle of vocal and instrumental pieces. It consists of 6 constituent cycles, or maqams, each of which is divided into an instrumental section, mushkilot, and a vocal part, nasr. Each suite contains a series of pieces related by melodic resemblance, but set in different metrorhythmic genres. In general, every single suite falls on an older distinction between a fixed canonical sequence of pieces and an open-ended sequence that followed it. At the center of maqam tradition is vocal music. By the way, to explain the essence of shash maqam for Central Asian culture, in a way it's something like raga for the Indian culture. So shash maqam plays the same role. And it's interesting that the length of the cycle, if which is not performed in the full size these days in the 21st centuries, but used to be performed for court ceremonies, the whole length it will take about of non-stop singing and playing for a week. So days and nights performance will bring to the end, to the last beat of Shash Maqam. That's the size of this monumental cycle, which represents a court or palace culture and still very popular, still to be the pride of the Uzbek Tajik classical music tradition. At the center of Maqam is vocal music. Singers have the greatest cachet among performance and the ability to reach a higher tessitura pitch in the ouch or culmination of a song and sustain it over an entire long breath is much admired by connoisseurs of classical music. Singing Maqam, however, is far more than a display of virtuosity. I quote, "The lyrical expressiveness of the Maqam is also a means of conveying the beauty and symbolic power of the poetic text. The text composed in classical form is ghazal, are redolent with symbols drawn from Sufism, the mystical trend in Islam. The most salient in these symbols is love, while describing human feelings and activities alludes metaphorically to love of the divine." So the melodic development of each Maqam vocal piece should be based on ghazal poetry. It progresses through a series of structural divisions. One of the most popular singer, it's the pride of the Uzbek culture, is certainly Munajat Yilcheva. She used to perform all over the places, in Europe, and was at least 3 times performing in London, York, Edinburgh. So she's a singer #1, and she's particularly famous for her performance of Shash Maqam, parts of Shash Maqam. So, as I said, one of the most famous Munajat song, called also Munajat, which in translation means ascent to God, or a prayer. And that's an interesting phenomenon because she became, with that song, she became a celebrity overnight after the TV broadcast, and where she performed this song. And now everyone knows Munajat by that song. So it's a really typical, song for the culture. And this is in Uzbek, Alisher Navai poem Ghazal by Alisher Navai. But here is the translation, which I would like to ask once again, Henrietta, please.
My beloved was to come tonight, with his face like a rose and his figure like that of a cypress tree, but he didn't. The whole night sleep deserted my eyes. Full of hope, I would take a few steps on the road towards him. My soul was taking flight, but this fickle betrayer didn't come. Bereft of his angel face, I wept and wept like a mad woman. Whoever saw me must have thought that I was a fool. Is there such a thing as a faithful suitor? If there is one, why does not every step lead him to his beloved? Navoy, rejoice in the house of your heart, for sadness never floods a house where wine flows.
Thank you very much. So let's listen to that Munajat song. I'm sorry, it's a long example, but I wanted you to hear the culmination, you know, the step-by-step rising dynamics, you know, where I don't want to go into detailed musical analysis, but melody, rhythm, meter, accompanying musical instruments, the voice, the tessitura, everything, you know, was covered to bring the attention to the ouch, which is a culmination, to the highest dynamic point of this song. And that is a perfect example how this Sufi idea of maqams and stations was reflected in the classical Uzbek Tajik maqam music. So, you know, you can see one line after another, one bait after another, and how it happens, you know, the whole culmination process. But in general, main features of Sufism, you know, as we said, it's a hierarchy, community meetings, the presence of silsila and the performance of zikr and so on. But you can ask me, we are talking so far about classical music, palace music, court tradition music of Central Asia. What about folk traditions? And this is a very interesting point to turn now to the very popular folk traditional phenomenon, because only women manage to preserve some Sufi rituals, Sufi-related rituals in their practice, which they keep, you know, performing up till 21st century nowadays. For example, there is a special kind of rituals, they call it okish, where all those Sufi, main Sufi orders, main Sufi rules are represented. Sufism is the path to perfection, goes through many different stages, increasing in emotional experience, and a similar process happens in folk music. The problem with studying this phenomenon is only one, that Uzbek Tajik or Central Asian folk music related to religious genres, Islam or Sufism, has never been studied properly or taken seriously by the academic communities. Certainly there are some reasons for that. For example, during the Soviet time, let's say for 70 years in the Soviet Union, to talk about religion or to study religion or to collect, you know, data about religious ceremonies was forbidden. So people just were afraid and tried to even to continue it, but in the underground without sharing the experience. So, and as a result, although this kind of okish rituals, they're, you know, existing in different forms, like life cycle ceremonies and religious ceremonies and festivals, or calendar cycle and religious celebrations. However, it's interesting that only in the rural area of Central Asia you can find those rituals. Central Asia consists of 2/3 of rural population. So if you go to the, you know, the further you go from the capitals and urban area, the more interesting examples of these Sufi-related rituals you will find. But it's interesting to say only in female communities they're still practicing these songs. Shall we try one of these? So it was Göçtemaz village, not far from Andijan, in the very heart of Fergana Valley, where I recorded it in 1999.
Padişah kendi yanıya salam verdi oğlan ya. Helal aldı salamın. Padişah qavmin Hamir aydi ulan Üç götürge kun korgan Satar nusan bizge can Hacan bahaladındır.
As you can see, that was a hymn to commemorate the memory of the founder of Naqshbandi Sufi order, Hoxha Bahauddin Naqshbandi. So, although that order was established many centuries ago in Bukhara, women in Fergana Valley these days are still singing those hymns. And if you ask, for example, academics, from the Academy of Science in Uzbekistan, male representative of the academy, what kind of songs is it or what kind of heritage and so on, they have no idea. Usually it's something still little known, and it's our great advantage as a scholars, being a female scholar, to be available to make recordings, to be accessible to those kind of rituals, make recordings, and to study this phenomenon. So let me show you how many female rituals in different forms are existing in Uzbekistan. As I said, only in rural area, in village area. This is the preparation of sumalak. It's something which women should cook for 24 hours on the day before Navruz coming. So it's 22nd of March every single day. It's a very old pre-Islamic ritual which they keep these days, and for 24 hours they cook this sweet halwa called sumalak, and the only condition for this cooking, they should sing non-stop. Can you imagine 24 hours non-stop singing? So there are many different examples of this sumalak preparation in different areas, but this is one of them. So morning ritual in Baisun. I wanted to show you this example because Baisun is the area which is on the border between Uzbekistan and Afghanistan, in the mountains area. And you can see, by the way, on the table nap on the floor, women are commemorating. The widow is in the center and the lady in the white scarf is in the middle. She is the leader of the ceremony. And look what they're doing, what they have on the table nap. It's actually 7 symbols of Zoroastrianism. So you can see that in rural area, in mountain area, in some villages, there are these traces of Zoroastrianism. 7 symbols like the fire, the flower, the sweet, the oil, the mirror, and the water, and the honey, and so on. Which means you come there, thinking you will see 21st century, ritual and so on, and you see that the pre-Islamic features in those rituals are quite common. Denau, it's another area in Surkhandarya, so southern Uzbekistan, and here Otenoi, which is a leader. I didn't have time to tell you more about this female mullah or female imams. It's the status of religious women which live in every single village. So every single village in Uzbekistan, Tajikistan has this interesting, female representative of religious education among women and girls. So it's very important to women. And you can see in the middle a woman who is leading the ritual. She was very young. I was really shocked in a way because she looked like 20 years old, who knew everything, and you see the respect from her neighbors was terrific. And only there coming to this ritual, because I was looking for such rituals to make recordings, I recognized that the reason to do this, ritual was very simple. The head of the house, the landlord of this place, he got promotion. He became a chief in the local train station, and that's why his family decided to throw, this kind of not a party but a religious ritual, with singing ghazals and medieval and certainly surah recitation of Quran and medieval ghazals, Sufi ghazals. Beshik toy, it's a very popular ritual in Uzbekistan. It's the first putting baby in the cradle, and it happens on the 40th day. And this one was in Baisun area, which I like very much for the very original culture and way of dressing and so on. So you see that for the first time, the face of the baby could be opened to the public, and for that they should read some ghazals and sing some songs. And here it's a photo which I took while doing my field recordings in Afghanistan, in northern part of Afghanistan. That was Mazar-e Sharif, and you see that the end of Ramadan, local women celebrated with singing and playing daf, and you can see only women and children. Certainly children, I mean boys particularly, they were very attracted seeing someone with the video camera. I had a very small one, so they wanted to be in, although usually as moms, their moms confess they don't join them. One of such distinguished Otenoi in Uzbekistan is certainly from Fergana Valley, from the village Dur, is Malika Askarova. She is just like any women in the village, very supportive towards their neighbors, her neighbors, and to children and so on. You can see she is with one of the neighboring child. It's a very famous zikr, Kulhul Allah, which they recite in order to commemorate someone's, death.
Bir bağın didarine kırarım bu aklım. 22 yaşta çöller gezip yok buldum. Dağlara çıkıp taat kılıp gözüm oydum. Didarine kırarım canım toydum. Bir bağın didarine kırarım.
The main line, which repeated many times in this zikr, it's based on the question, "Oh Allah, can you open your face? I would like to see you." That's the kind of refrain which repeats many times. So now we are coming to the conclusions. As we can see today, in the 21st century, Central Asian music in both art maqam forms or folk ritual forms is based on a similar idea and structure that of a long journey or the way tariqah. In maqam style, music and originated melodic pattern develops slowly with consequent emphasis on the culmination, producing an image similar to the Sufi way of tariqah. So Sufism, as the greatest development within Islam, has not disappeared from the scene of Central Asia culture and art. One can find the evidence of this in the art and folk music forms within female communities in Central Asia. Thank you very much for your attention. Now I'm expecting your questions.
One of the things that you were telling us is presumably during the communist period, it was easier for these traditions to be maintained in the female, more private zone than in the world of men. I'm wondering if you could complete the picture by giving us a sense of how sort of the tariqah movements in Central Asia managed to survive amongst the men, because I have a recollection of visiting the mazar of al-Bukhari in, I guess, the mid-1980s, which was still in the communist time, and talked to the imam there, and it was Ramadan, and he said, of course, we are all keeping the fast, in Ramadan. We're all Naqshbandis, but nobody really notices. So it was clear to me that there was a very living tradition of keeping up Islamic traditions through the tariqah techniques, but that was, as I understood it, for the men as well as for the women. So I wonder if you could tell us whether this maqam musical framing of the spiritual journey of the Sufis is something that was maintained consciously rather than just folklorically amongst male singers as well.
Thank you very much. It's a very good question because I didn't have time to go further, to develop this issue and to explain the reasons why as the Communist Party considered at the end of the Soviet Empire in 1991, they thought that the country is now completely, fulfilled with atheist populations because they tried very hard to make people atheists. But what happened in 1930s, due to the Stalin rules, many the most distinguished people in various areas, including religions, including Islam. So the most famous muftis, imams, sheikhs and so on, they were persecuted and imprisoned and sent to Gulag, from where many of them didn't come back. So it happened not only in Uzbekistan or in whole Central Asia, it happens also in Tatarstan, Bashkortostan, Chechnya and many others within Russia or outside Russia, like Azerbaijan, Islamic areas. When men, which means masters of the houses or fathers, husbands, brothers, they were taken to gulags. What happened in the local area? The family, who was mainly represented by female members, they certainly were remembering all those sounds, songs, rituals, ghazals, prayers, which men used to do within the male gatherings. Sufi rituals particularly. Thank you for telling about Naqshbandi, because Naqshbandi was famous for performing Sufi rituals outside on the banks of the river or outside in the fields and so on. But certainly women could hear those sounds. They could hear, those ghazals, and when you hear it on a regular basis, you remember something, which means women missing their husbands, brothers, sons, they started to lead those rituals themselves. And what was interesting, that they somehow preserved this, the whole register of, various genres of within, Sufi orders. And as a result, many Sufi orders, although they were geographically moved, for example, the one I shown you, Hoja Bahova Dindin, women in Fergana Valley, which kind of, 400 miles away from Bukhara area, where Hoja Bahova Dindin established his orders. But women in completely different Fergana Valley, close place with their real god, not god, but Sufi order Yasaviya. However, they performed, up till now, they still sing this hymn for the founder of Naqshbandi Sufi order, which means for women there wasn't, perhaps due to this terrible, time of Stalin's regime, of this gulags time where all best people were sent there and disappeared forever. So they continued this very rare, heritage, spiritual heritage, perhaps just missing their husbands. And the interesting thing, that female activity was never taken seriously, was never accepted as a public activity, because actually the household, traditional household in Central Asia, I don't have this slide with me to show, it's divided in a way Tashkari and Ichkari. It's like, for example, this is a sitting room where all members of or the village could be invited and have a party or tea, have a conversation, whatever. But each carried somewhere in the very farthest side of the yard, which means neighbors. They didn't know actually what women doing there every evening when they're gathering together with their children. But because there were several generations, youngest, they picked up from their mothers and grandmothers. And the more they missed their fathers and husbands, the more they repeatedly, performed those zikrs. Interesting thing, that when some of those imams came back, these knowledgeable, authorities from local area, they couldn't perform properly all this range, of different forms of zikrs and Sufi orders, repertoire, because once again they were watched. So what today is performed by, let's say, male part of Ummah in Central Asia. Okay, azan, call for prayer, right? Recitation of Quran, and that's it. I mean, the main things are still performed. But the rest of it, including Dedi-yo, which is quite annoying, this educational verses, which means, grandma telling to her granddaughter, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. It's such a famous genre that in Uzbek, there is a saying, if they want someone to shut up, they say, can you stop your Dedi-yo, please? Because it was kind of, from very early childhood, everyone heard it and so on. This kind of very interesting, it's kind of the senior saying to the youngest how to behave and so on. These examples are all well preserved only in female communities. But all these women, they were very scared. I mean, when I came, it was, the beginning of my research was 1991. The Soviet Union was collapsing, and nobody knew what's the future of the country, but they were very cautious. They asked me, are you a journalist? I said, no, I'm a musicologist. Will you tell about us, for newspapers or magazines? I said, no, I'm doing my research. I'm just collecting, what you are saying in your recitations and your ghazals. Why you are here? I said, because it's my, new subject of research. I'm just a researcher. And when only they found that I have also connection to one of these women, because one of my grandma was also involved in such performance, who passed away by that time, then they consider me as their own. And I was allowed to come to every day and night time for all different rituals, because sometimes they even performed zikr, which considered to be completely lost culture of performance. If someone passed away, they had to perform it immediately and so on. So I got this kind of, green card to all the celebrations. I was certainly fortunate to have this access, but my problem was another one. Trained as a classical musicologist with all this kind of sonata, symphony genres and so on and so forth, opera. I didn't know what shall I do with this data, with these recordings. If only I approached someone medievalist, in the Academy of Science in Uzbekistan, they had no idea this, as they say, grandmothers are singing somewhere, More than that, I discovered that some of these ghazals, for example, by Ahmad Yasavi, 11th century, so 1,000 years, before created ghazals. When I transcribed and brought to these academics, they said, it's unbelievable. We don't have it in our access. We don't have it in academic, for academic use. Because what they have got, it's kind of, some part of the huge heritage of Ahmad Yasavi, 11th century poet. But what women keep performing, I mean, men, they are not allowed to go to and they are not interested to go to the female gatherings, which means it was kind of lost level of culture. So I was surprised, nobody could explain me what it's all about. So it took a long time, that's why my book, where is it, did I bring it? I was doing the book for 20 years. It took me 20 years to realize that it was an old Islamic heritage, although produced and performed in the rituals. Thank you so much for your question.
I wanted to ask about one of the, I can't remember her name, the contemporary ghazal singers, the contemporary ones.
Munaja.
You said she had Jewish heritage?
Oh,
And I just
Berta
wondered whether
Davidova.
it was also, I guess, popular in Jewish communities, or whether they had or is it just that she decided to learn them herself, or do they also have their own heritage?
Thank you so much. It's a very good question, because we are talking about art music, right? Classical maqam, which was inherited from palace culture, court culture. So the Soviet Union has not collapsed, was certainly established in 1917. So what happens in this time? From one side, inside of Uzbekistan, it's a strong, orthodox Islamic rules, which means no women allowed to perform publicly, anything, nothing, not at all. Second, from this Moscow and, central capitals of the Russia and Soviet Union, there were another rules. All women should perform, in a mass, on the stage, all together. For example, the dutar, which is traditional #1 instrument in Central Asia, was in fact the only instrument which survived with female repertoire, because all other instruments, they were forbidden for women to play. But dutar, having a very tender voice, very mild voice, once again, because each kari or female part of the household was far away from the main, rooms. What women did and played, nobody knew, so nobody minded, And as a result, Moscow, for example, cultural policy was to have 20 women on the stage playing dutar simultaneously, which was not possible for local people, because dutar is a solo instrument, and it's actually, silk strings. You can't play simultaneously because it requires some tuning, special tuning, which was a difficult issue and so on. So they performed to please Moscow and for all these communist celebrations. They performed Russian balalaika repertoire, because there wasn't anything else. So they played all this Russian Svetit Mesit, Svetit Yasny, which is the moon is bright, and big and so on, which was from the repertoire of balalaika, which had nothing to do with dutar. So many, this kind of cultural clashes happened, in 1930s. But now, coming back to your question, if women were not allowed to perform maqam, art music, how could they make recordings? Only in 1953, when Stalin passed away, shash maqam is the main heritage, court and palace heritage of Central Asia, was allowed to be studied and to become, a focus of attention of scholars and so on. So, and they started to look for a way to make recordings. In 1960s, Yunus Rajabi has produced 20 LPs, records with shash maqam. As I told you, the whole performance of shash maqam will take 7 days and 7 nights, non-stop performance. But they needed some female voices. So they looked around, and none of women, female, performers were local Uzbek Muslim, could be, involved in this performance, because it was not allowed by Islamic law. So Jewish, particularly women from Fergana Valley, they growing up in this Fergana, Andijan area and so on, living surrounded by the local, Uzbek families, aristocracy and so on. They learned, these Jewish women, like Berta Davidova, there was another one, Barno Ishakova, who immigrated to Jerusalem when only the Soviet Union collapsed and so on. So these Bukharian Jewish women, they really helped to preserve Shashmakom and to promote it for the future.
How far is the Okish rituals a continuation of the shamanism or Zoroastrianism in that region? And then
Thank you.
A second question, squeeze in, is how influential was music among villages in spreading Islam in the region? I don't know if that's something.
Is it the question about female communities or,
Yes,
or in general?
Yes, I mean, did the spread of Islam in the area? Did it have was there an aspect of it that was spread through music or through poems or?
Islam spread before the Muhammad.
Yes, absolutely. Islam came from 7th century, so which means it had no any kind of connection to the music they performed, to rituals and so on. I mean, everyone who is born in Uzbekistan, and bred in Uzbek, they're just Muslim. We don't, girls, particularly women, perhaps like many other places in the world, they don't have even a ritual of initiation. So, but what was your first question? Shamanism, yes, Zoroastrianism and so on. I shown you some features of Zoroastrianism, right, in the morning ritual. So, which means several villages, they keep several connections, and it's so much deeply in the culture of people that they don't actually consider it's kind of outside of Islamic, culture. Shamanism particularly is widely spread because, for example, I was once witnessing a very interesting ritual in Tajikistan, in Dushanbe. The year was 1996, I guess, and that was a terrible year. Tajikistan was the only republic which went through civil war before they, established themselves as the independent republic. That was a terrible, terrible story, and many people, were affected and so on. So, and the main problem was, jobless crowds, because the whole infrastructure was broken and there wasn't any chance for people to find jobs and so on. So, and I was in Khodzhent, it's the city on the border of Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and it was central part, I think it was May, or so the beginning of the spring, or quite warm day. It was strange because center of the city, it was Central Park, was full of crowds and people were queuing, And I asked locals, I was with local people, what is it? They said, we have baby, what was her name? I can't remember now. Which is a local healer who is practicing a healing ceremony for 20 minutes, but free of charge. I said, okay, what she is healing? They said, everything. So not only people coming just, walking from different parts of Tajikistan, which is high mountains area, because it's free of charge. They're coming and queuing and so on in order to get relief from many problems, bringing with themselves photographs of their members of family who couldn't come, who didn't have a chance to come, And she helped with simple way. First of all, you should have a white, scarf to put on your head, so some of them even didn't cover just, and a jar of water in front of you. And they're sitting just on the floor, and she is just praying. It's the ritual which starts with Islamic prayer, the Quran, reciting, and going and just touching their heads, you know. And people say they were just miracle, you know, recovery, from many problems and so on. And she was a real angel, and there were some interesting stories behind that. One day she lost both of her children, and there was a portrait of her two children, a daughter and a son. And in the dream, because she was desperate in that situation, Hazrat Ali came over saying, for 10 years you should help people to recover, and then your children will come back. And that was the beginning of the story. But would you believe, when only she finished this, I don't know the end of the story, I've never been again there, sorry, but she used Surah of Quran and praying, and ghazals of Alisher Navai, like the one which Henrietta read us, and so on. But the most interesting for me as a musicologist was that in the middle of this 20-minute long session, in the middle, she used to put any cassettes, whatever cassettes, you know, are available. It could be any kind of rubbish, you know. And people still, at the end, certainly they were once again, you know, Surah of Quran and so on. People were recovering. So this is kind of something, you know, which brings together shamanism and Sufism and everything. Otherwise, how would you explain the wonder?
What was the relation between this female gathering, the Sufi traditions, with the traditional orthodoxy scholarship? Like, how was the relation? Because how the male or female scholars looked at this kind of gatherings. Like you said that there is, for every village there is a female religious representative. So it's mainly leading this gatherings or rituals, or also teaches and passes the knowledge of the religion as kind of scholar and something like that.
Well, regarding the scholars, only when Soviet Union collapsed 1991, that was allowed to, at least to make recordings, or, you know, to collect some data about this phenomenon, right? So otherwise there wasn't anything written or said, or, you know, any kind of rules for society or for scholars, you know, suggestion. Although I learned later that in the Institute of Study of Arts in Uzbekistan and Academy of Science, there were some recordings from the beginning of the 20th century, and nobody was allowed to, you know, to get access to those recordings. So all these rituals, they're still there in terrible condition, so I don't know whether they will survive or not. But regarding women, female, what was your question? From old generation to the younger generation. That's interesting. Autonoi is a very special status of a kind of female imam or female mullah. When these women, they gave lessons on a regular basis to local girls. And one of these Autonoi, by the way, Malika Askarova, she, which unfortunately her recordings was not well represented today, sorry for technical issues. She told me an interesting story that she learned her knowledge, you know, of this. It was the hidden kind of business, you know. I mean, you can learn and you can spread it, but nobody should know it. At night time, her parents, like her other friends' parents, used to bring girls at night time to the house of Razia Sultanova, very old lady in her 80s. And they repeated, you know, she taught them the Arabic script, she taught them how to read, you know, Quran, but mostly all her attention was paid to these rituals, to the different repertoire of Sufi origin. I don't know, did she do it on purpose, or perhaps it just was the main part of her repertoire, but anyway, Malika told me that as a girl, as a teenager, they loved it and they wanted to stay long hours without paying any attention to the senior, you know, age of their teacher. And when parents, in night were coming kind of 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning taking girls back, they, finally stopped their lessons. And that was from one year to another. Once again, hidden from the officials, from the chef of the local collective farm, whatever. So that was going hidden, but exactly from the older generation to the younger generation, And then they had the rite of initiation, in a way. Very simple one, but however, they had to go it exactly like in Sufi brotherhood.
I just wanted to get a sense of the soundscape of the place that you were at. So you mentioned that the azan, you could hear the azan, you could hear the Quran. Was it something that sort of resounded within the community? And I'm also wondering, in your opinion, what would be at stake at the silence of this woman? So if this woman was silenced, what would be lost? Is it a sense of religiosity? Is it a cultural tradition that's lost? Or is it sort of a family relationship that would be lost if this woman was silenced?
Thank you for your question. As I said, talking about a soundscape, you're right, your question about silence, we didn't talk about it today, but as I said, even all Sufi rituals have 2 main forms, at least in Central Asia, where there are so many, origins of so many different brotherhoods, Sufi orders brotherhood. One zikr, it's loud, and as people said from Tashkent, even the beginning of the 20th century, let's say 100 years ago. Tashkent is 2 million population city today. But they had such a loud zikrs on the banks of the river that there was dust, up to the sky, which means that was really something, noisy and very, very dynamic and so on. Other Sufi zikrs, they have completely different version and way of performance, because the Sufi sheikh sitting in the corner somewhere, and one after another students are coming and they should sit in opposite, praying all the time, and the only touch they could allow is by knees. So knees of students should touch the knees of because sitting on the knees anyway, the knees of the, sheikh. That was another very popular form of, Sufi zikr. But different Sufi zikrs, they practice different way. For example, about silent zikr, I heard from Afghanistan, they have this Huftiyaj Sufi zikr, which is still doing this silent way, Otherwise, as you know, in Turkey particularly, there are so many interesting ways, very convincing ways, very loud zikr. So it's a very impressive, rituals, very impressive performance.
I just want to ask, what's the situation like today in Central Asia or particular regions that you've studied? Are these circles or remembrance still quite secretive? Are they more open now? What's this on the ground at the moment?
It's a very good question, because in fact today in Uzbekistan, once again, you can't do your research on religious issues, which means, the control from the government goes on and off, on and off. When I was last time in those villages, I think it was 2006, women told me that they were not allowed now even to show their faith and to pray, in public 5 times a day, which means even such simple rules of Islam were once again, not appreciated. So once again, the government created kind of limits and so on. But these days, when only they, these women and so on, when only they think about religious, gathering together, they pay most attention in order to, reject everyone who could bring some harm. So once again, it's dangerous. So we don't know whether tomorrow they will continue everything. That's why, as I always say, it's a real advantage being a female researcher, that you had access to this phenomenon, but we don't know whether it will, going on and on. So even this advantage doesn't work, forever. At least in the unstable politically and economically republics, places like Central Asia.
I wondered if, when you started your research, because you were looking at musicology, I wondered if you realised how much of it would be, how much is the content that went with the music was going to be Islamic.
When I started this research, I should confess, I lived and worked in Moscow after graduating and getting my PhD degree and so on. And one of the publishers, we didn't know that the Soviet Union is going to collapse. One of the publishers approached me saying, can you write for us some kind of very, short brochure on the subject, music and religion? I said, yes, but where? They said, it's better if you go to your, place of origin, where I grew up in Uzbekistan, and they knew it. And you will do. So coming there, I had no idea what I will find, whether there are any performances or there are any kind of rituals and so on. It was out of the blue that one of my former classmates, my close friend, she told me, when I asked her, it was, still the time of Soviet Union, people were, at least they knew that they shouldn't even talk about it, loudly. She said, I think in our, she lived in a block of flats, she said, in our house, I've heard one of the women, she performs some kind of, religious stuff, but I never met her, I will ask. And she asked that woman who took me to the female gatherings, because sometimes these otenoi, these female imams, they have the gatherings. It's kind of the most kind of several presidents are gathering somewhere, and they in a way compete in knowledge, in the performance, of the oldest, ghazals and so on. It was real, for me, excitement to be there. And it's good that you asked about the impression of this kind of music, because the performance, can you imagine 4 or 5 women sitting together, in the senior age, with tiny voices already according to they're performing something, but the power of this performance was completely taking me away. So you just lose any count of time and place, you just forget about everything. So I never thought those not professional, as we say, performers, not, practicing musicians, without any kind of stage, experience, whatever, they could take you so far away, take away your imagination, everything. I was just absolutely taken, and disappeared, I was absolutely not surprised, but in a way shocked, because it was something we never taught, we never were told, we never had any experience, we never read anything in newspaper, whatever, because it was a closed, forbidden subject. So it was just, probably I was lucky, certainly privileged to get such experience, but it was out of the blue. And that's why it took me a long time to understand what's the nature of it, what's the origin, what's the phenomenon about, where it's coming from. So that was complete, surprise. But thank God, thank Allah, I had a chance to be available, to be in the right, as we say, place and the right time. So I'm very happy about it.
Great.
Thank you very
I
much.
think we'll have to finish there, but if you could all join me in thanking Razia for the fascinating presentation.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Cambridge Muslim College, training the next generation of Muslim thinkers.